Lantern light trembled along the clipped edges of the U when a voice at my ear said, "Hide with me." His breath stirred the ribbon at my bonnet. I did not turn. I simply let the Duke of Blackwater take my gloved hand and draw me between two shadowed hedges, as though the maze itself had parted for us. Gravel grated beneath our feet. Silk brushed evergreen. Somewhere beyond the wall of foliage a violin reeled, dogged by a laugh too loud for taste. "Forgive me," His Grace murmured. "There is a trap set in the East Alley, my mother's trap, and I would not see you bait it. I thought duchesses ordered routes," I managed. "Not traps. Augusta orders both." We halted at a star-shaped clearing where the hedge made 5 dark spokes. Over our heads the paper lanterns swung like tame moons. I could smell crushed yew, resin, and secrecy. He had not released my hand, nor did I withdraw it. "What does she mean to do?" I asked, because I heard my aunt's voice inside my skull. "Remember, Verity, you have only your name and a decent police left." And I could not bear to be foolish with either. Nicholas's jaw flexed in the half-light. To present me to an heiress at the very moment her father performs his bow, then to let the ondite find us drifting together, and to allow gratitude to perform what inclination refuses. An heiress. Manchester. Cotton. A fortune that would silence my trustees and soothe Augusta's sleep. "And why?" I asked before I could swallow the impertinence. "Should you hide with me instead?" "Because I have never seen you drift," he said. "You walk as if you mean to arrive." Heat climbed my throat. It was the sort of answer a rake would polish, yet it sounded raw from him, as if he had only now discovered it. I ought to have laughed. I did not. I listened to the scrape of another pair of soles on gravel, the whisper of skirts. "Too near. Here," he said, and tugged me into a narrower path where the hedge bent close. We fitted ourselves into shadow. Through a lattice of trimmed leaves I could see the lantern-spangled alley. 2 figures paused. A tall lady with a crescent of diamonds set like frost in her coiffure, and a man whose gait told of long mornings in musty chambers. "Mr. Pallister," said the lady, each syllable honed to a key's edge. "You will introduce my son to Miss Turnbridge precisely when I incline my fan. There is no harm in affection, but there is ruin in romance." "Very good, Your Grace," murmured the solicitor. "I will not have him squander Blackwater on sentiment. The settlements must be repaired. He must marry money." It should not have stung, for I had none to marry, and she named no one at all. Yet the words found me as surely as if Augusta had pushed a pin through my card. Nicholas's fingers tightened on mine. For a breath, I thought he meant to step out and be seen. Instead, he said, very quietly, "She has never forgiven me for living." I did not know then what he meant. I knew only that the air inside the hedge seemed thinner than the air outside it. Another laugh broke upon the alley. The violin faltered. The Dowager Duchess folded her fan with the snap of judgment and drifted away like a ship under full sail. We did not move until the lantern over our heads creaked itself steady again. Nicholas released my hand as if it had burned him. "I beg your pardon, Lady Verity. I had no right to rescue me from a trap," I said, and discovered that my voice too could hone to an edge. "You had every right, unless you mean to build your own." His mouth bent, not quite a smile. "If I build anything, it will have a door you choose to open." A footman's call, "Your Grace," carried down the alley, thinned by the hedges. The knight hurried forward. The violin caught its tune. The tame moon swung. He stepped back, and I felt the cool strike where his warmth had been. "Go first," he said. "I will follow when the lantern turns." I obeyed. I could not do otherwise. The path opened to the terrace, pale with spilled candlelight from the windows of Blackwater Hall. I did not glance behind me. My aunt, Lady Honora, materialized from a knot of matrons, like a ship from fog. "There you are," she said, and squeezed my arm. "The Dowager is looking. Smile as if you had been discussing roses." "I seldom discuss roses," I said. "They require no improvement." "Then discuss how agreeable the night is," my aunt breathed. And we drifted into the brightness, the safety, the scrutiny. I did not see Nicholas again before the candles guttered and the last carriage's lamps bobbed away into the dark. I did not sleep either. I lay awake, listening to the house settle around me, murmuring pipes, a far-off door, the quick soft whisper of a servant's tread. I did not know whether the maze had been a beginning or a mistake. By morning, Blackwater resolved the question for me. The porter's bar slammed home before breakfast. Footmen posted at the side doors. The key to the letterbox jingled against the Dowager's chatelaine as she crossed the hall like a general reviewing troops. "A day of propriety after last night's excess," she announced to the assembled household, her voice glinting. "No calls until further notice. No notes sent without passing my table." "Your Grace," my aunt began, polite, pale. "Lady Honora, your charge will be protected from the inconvenience of gossip." Augusta's gaze found me, precise as a pin. "Lady Verity, you will confine yourself to the library, the morning room, and the south terrace. and you will be grateful. For what? I asked before my good sense recovered. For my keys, she said, and let them sing once more upon their chain. The butler bowed. The post-room door closed with a lock's clean, final faith. Somewhere down the corridor a bolt shot into place. I stood in my borrowed morning light and listened to Blackwater become a lock. The library ought to have been a sanctuary. It smelled of dust, Russia leather, and a long-ago pipe. But the very quiet seemed appointed by Augusta, obedient, too pleased with itself to be honest. I traced the gilding on a calf's skin spine and tried not to think of the way the key to the letterbox had chimed against her chatelaine like a bell for a tethered beast. Milk or tears, my lady? Sally Pike appeared as if conjured, balancing a tea tray and irreverence in equal measure. Tea, I said, and the truth, if you have it, she poured. Truth is, Her Grace told Mrs. Lafford that you was to be, beg pardon, kept quiet till some house party of hers is in train. Truth is also your aunt took a draught last night for her nerves and woke with a head like a drum. She'll be right by noon if nobody rings it. A house party? I repeated, too carefully. The cup rattled against its saucer. When? Soon as plum cake can be had and beds can be turned, Sally said. Her Grace sent 3 footmen to the attics before breakfast. Oh, and I seen Mr. Keats, the Duke's valet. Aye, with his jaw set like a dock bollard. Slip me this. She produced, not from her apron, that would have been folly under the Dowager's eye, but from the innocent folds of a dusting cloth, a square of paper folded twice, and sealed with a smear of plain wax. My pulse stumbled. Sally's eyes were very bright. Shall I look the other way, my lady? Yes, I said, and broke the seal. Lady Verity, forgive yesterday and the manner of it. I could not risk you to my mother's theatre. She will have barred the doors this morning. Do not be dismayed. There is still a way that is ours to choose. Will you meet me in the orangery at 11, when the moon clears the roof? I will come by the garden stair. N. I read it twice. My fingers remembered, without asking leave, the shape of his hand around mine. You look as if you swallowed a coal and liked the heat, Sally said. It is foolish, I told her. It is necessary. She flashed a grin. Both can be true. I'll set your aunt's shawl and keep watch with the housemaids mending so Mrs. Lafford don't sniff you out. Only mind the scullery door. Her Grace has put a boy there to count us like kittens. The morning passed with the heavy-footed tread of a siege. Augusta's shadow crossed doorways like a sundial. Post came and went nowhere. At noon, I tried my aunt's handle and found it secured from the inside with a chair. I am well, darling, she called faintly. Her Grace insists on quiet for my head. Do you wish to go down? I wish, my aunt said, and faltered. I wish we were at Hallowell Court with our own spoons and no one to count them. By 3, the silver tray in the hall glittered with calling cards turned away. Mrs. Hartley and Miss Hartley, Lady Dane, even the vicar's neat T. Brooke. The butler presented them to Augusta like casualties. At least the vicar tried, I murmured. Reverends always try, said Sally from behind a potted palm. It's their trade. Then she hissed, Mind, for the Dowager herself advanced, a page trailing with a tasseled cushion like a captive dog. Lady Verity, Augusta said smoothly, you will be glad to hear I have sent for Viscount Harbury to enliven our little party. A discreet gentleman, correct as a column. He remembers your father. I believe he remembers everyone's checks, I said, before I could smother the spark. Her smile cut. A good memory is a virtue. Yours might profit by it. Ladies who heroically bear reverses do not wander in gardens unescorted. I did not wander. No, she said, keen as a pin. You hid. When she was gone, Sally muttered something unfit for a drawing room. Harbury, she snorted. I'd sooner wet a ledger. I spent the afternoon like a pen pressed to paper that would not take ink. At 10:30, Sally brought a shawl and a pair of soft shoes and set them without a word on the hearthrug. Moon's up, she whispered. Boy at the scullery is asleep, praise be. I'll cough twice if anyone comes. Down the passage. I slipped through corridors that seemed all nose and ears. At the back stair, a night lamp guttered. Wax dripped like tears. The garden door's latch lifted with a sigh, as if the house were relieved to be rid of me. Dew took the hem of my gown. The air tasted of damp leaves and the sugar breath of ripening fruit. The orangery lay along the south wall, a glass arc full of citrons and orange trees in terracotta tubs. The bricks kept the day's warmth. The panes held the moon like a drowned coin. I let myself in with the gardener's latch, as Sally had shown me in a better, freer week. Orange blossom touched my throat like a promise. Your Grace? I whispered, absurdly into the perfumed dim. Something moved, a shadow slipping between trunks. My heart leapt to my mouth. Nicholas? Footsteps came fast along the outside path. Not one tread, but several. Not light, but official. The key turned on the far side of the orangery door. Slow, deliberate, certain, and the lock answered like a traitor. The key stilled. Silence spilled back into the orangery in a hush of leaves and glass. I stood very straight, counting heartbeats. until a darker shape separated from the shadow of a lemon tree and said, "Lo, Verity." I thought the foolishness of my fear made my voice tremble. I thought she had locked me in with only the oranges to comfort me. "Not only oranges," Nicholas said, and I heard the smile he would not show. "My mother sets locks as other ladies set pearls. Mr. Keats learned her timetable. I came by the garden stair before she made her tour. I heard boots. 2 footmen," he said. "She will sleep better for the sound of a bolt." He stepped into a beam of moonlight fallen through the glass, and looked like every oath I had ever promised myself not to make. Honorable, impossible. His hair was untidy, as if he had raked it with impatient hands. "Forgive the theater last night. I did not mean to make you complicit in my rebellion." "I do not mind rebellion," I said. "Only waste." "Then we must spend nothing we cannot afford," he answered, swift, almost eager, and I saw then that he had come with purpose, hammered hard. "Let me court you, Lady Verity, openly, correctly. Let me ask your aunts, sanction at breakfast, and make the request to my mother at luncheon where all may hear it. I cannot protect you by stealth. She will sniff it out and turn it into scandal. But if I place you beneath the very shelter of propriety, she must fight me in daylight, on ground she respects." "Court me," I repeated, because the 2 words, set together, seemed absurdly fragile for the weight they carried. "You, who must marry money." "You heard her speak," he said, voice roughening. "You heard what I have heard since I first wore long coats, that my heart is an article to be bartered when it will fetch a price. I am not rich as Augusta would have me be, but I am not destitute. Blackwater can breathe if I order my affairs and defy the trustees' taste for dowries. I will not beggar you for sentiment, nor will I sell myself for solvency." "And what of my aunt?" I asked. "If you make a public declaration, Augusta will make a private war. Honora is gentle and easily wounded. She will be under my protection the instant you are," he said simply. "I have a sphere of influence even Augusta must respect." Then, softer, "What would you ask of me if you believed I meant it?" I thought of my father's debts, and my mother's ring now hawked, and my small hoard of dignity that I kept beneath a lock no dowager could reach. "Honesty," I said. "No vows made to silence a mother or to best other men. No words that cost you later." He inclined his head as if receiving an ambassador. "And from you, that you will not mistake gratitude for affection," I answered, though my pulse made a liar of me, or pity for either. "Very well," he said, and the smile reached his eyes now, faint as first light. "We will build nothing we cannot inhabit." He stepped closer. "We will go to Almack's, together, public, proper, arm in arm, and I will secure vouchers from the patronesses with my mother looking on. I will dance 2 sets and stand up for lemonade like a man under orders. We will be correct until the correctness chokes the gossip." I laughed helplessly, a sound that startled a bee from an orange flower. "You make a romance of rules." "We must, for now." His hand lifted, not quite touching my cheek, hovering in that inch where courage lives and caution argues. The air smelled of blossom and brick. "Verity," a lantern flared outside, washing the panes with gold. A shadow laid itself across the floor, tall, unmistakable, the profile as sharp as the edge of a sovereign. Augusta had come to try her lock. We dropped into stillness. The handle turned, the key tested. Satisfied by her own device, she moved along the glass wall, her light peering, her step unhurried. For one suspended breath, she paused opposite our row of trees. Oranges glowed like coins between us. Her fan, though she had no need of it at midnight, tapped once against her palm. When the lantern drifted on, I realized my hand had found Nicholas's coat and clutched it as if sea lay between us. He covered my fingers and did not let them go until the last tremor of light vanished. "We have until breakfast to be braver than her keys," he said. "At 11, I will call on your aunt. At noon, I will apply my name to the patroness's table. At 7, we will set our feet upon Almack's floor, and if the ceiling falls, it will crush us both together." "You dramatize," I said, which was unfair, for my throat ached. "Keats will see you safe to the stair," he said, stepping back into shadow. "Go, before she circles again." I went, though my bones protested. At the door, the night pressed cool and damp against my cheeks. The stars had the exact indifferent brilliance of Augusta's diamonds. On the garden stair, I paused and touched my fingers to my lips, not to silence them, but in recognition of a word I had not spoken. By morning, a different key turned, the polite clink of teacups, as my aunt, pale but resolute, took her place by the breakfast urn. The dowager's diamonds burned. The footmen arranged toast like troops on parade. "Your Grace," Nicholas said, voice even, "I have the honor to request the privilege of courting Lady Verity Somerton, under the protection of Lady Honora Finch, to commence at once." to be conducted with all propriety. Augusta's cup paused. A ship becalmed. At once? She repeated. At once, he said. The Dowager set her cup down. We leave for town within the hour, she declared. If there is to be correctness, it shall be seen where it matters. By Friday, we were in London, the Dowager's carriage and four flinging mud at milestones while we sat like chessmen being carried to the board. Blackwater House in Hanover Square smelled of beeswax and consequence. My aunt's color improved by sheer force of polish. Sally, who had never set foot inside so august a town address, looked upon the marble stair as if it might bite. At noon, Nicholas wrote out his names for the patroness's table with a hand that did not shake. I thought mine would shake merely looking at it. Lady Jersey will be in humor, my aunt whispered as she adjusted my sleeve. At least she ought. She won 11 rubbers last night. Luck favors the well-connected, Sally muttered, straightening my fichu, and them as make their own. Almac's assembly rooms blazed like a regiment of candles set to music. The floor had been chalked with arabesques. The scent of lemon and beeswax rose in polite waves. Gentlemen bowed, ladies curtsied, and the air hummed with the ton's favorite pastime, appraisal concealed as amiability. We approached the patroness's dais with the caution of supplicants. Lady Jersey glanced up with the calm of a general. Beside her, Mrs. Drummond Burrell wore approbation like a slightly smaller tiara. Eyes traveled, measured, tallied. Nicholas's voice was dry and brave. Ladies, I am Blackwater. So you are, Lady Jersey said, tapping the table lightly with a fan. And this? Lady Verity Somerton, he said steady, under the protection of Lady Honora Finch. My aunt's curtsy might not have bested a duchess's, but it had the appeal of sincerity. For one long blink, judgment hung. Then Lady Jersey's mouth bent, not unkindly. I like a young lady who looks as if the floor belongs to her, she said, and with an infinitesimal turn of a wrist placed 2 vouchers upon the green baize. Do not squander them. Relief ran through me so swiftly I nearly laughed. We will be extremely economical, Nicholas murmured, offering his arm as if for a treaty signing. We stood up together for the second country dance, and I discovered that whatever else the Duke might be, he was no bad dancer. He kept time as if time had dealt him injuries, and he meant to be civil to it despite. Harbury is here, he said, lightly, as we turned hands down the line. I had rather dance with the chalkwork, I murmured, admiring an elaborate swirl at our feet. Careful, the chalk has better income. We changed places, we clapped, we turned again. It felt perilously like happiness, like a thing we had found rather than stolen. Between sets, the lemonade tasted like reprieve, and then the air cooled about us as if a window had opened. Conversations rearranged themselves. A seam in the world straightened. Augusta had arrived. She did not look at me. That would have been too generous. She looked just past me as if the space I occupied had been borrowed from someone more useful. The cut indirect was so pristine that several matrons blinked as if dazzled. An ondette unfurled like a ribbon. The Dowager does not see her. The Duke insists upon seeing nothing else. Viscount Harbury materialized at my elbow with a bow at precisely the angle approved by the mirror of graces. He had the sort of eyes that look like coins in certain light. Lady Verity, he said, smooth. May I solicit the honor of your third? I had already promised it to Nicholas. My name glowed upon his card. He arrived, somehow taller than Harbury, though I knew the measure of them both. Forgive me, my lord, Nicholas said, courteous, not penitent. I have that privilege. Harbury's smile was a nicely sharpened butter knife. Of course, there is, after all, a season's worth of privileges. His gaze slid to the patronesses, to Augusta, to me. Might I call upon Lady Honora tomorrow? My aunt receives it too, I said, because correctness has its own kind of blade. Excellent, he replied, and turned away to trim his sail for other breezes. Do not let him trouble you, Nicholas murmured as the violins lifted their bows. He collects invitations as if they were guineas. And women? He prefers securities. The music began. He smiled, real this time, unarmored, and the set carried us forward until thought dissolved into turn and step, and the modest freedom of being watched for all the right reasons. Afterward, we stood under a sconce with our lemonade, while Lady Jersey's eyes twinkled in our direction, like a benison against boredom. For a breath, I believed we had changed the temperature of the room. Then Augusta's fan tapped twice, and a footman appeared with a silver salver and a letter sealed in the Duchess's hand. He presented it to my aunt with all the solemnity of a summons. Honora broke the seal, glanced at the neat, pitiless lines, and blanched. What is it? I asked, low. Her fingers trembled just enough to disturb the paper. We depart for Berkshire at dawn, she said. Her Grace invites. She swallowed. Nay, commands Viscount Harbury to join a weekend at Blackwater Hall. A corrective intimacy, she calls it. Nicholas took the note, read, and went very still as he had been in the hedge when the lantern passed. "Then we will meet her on her own ground," he said, quiet and dangerous. "But first, the fourth set is ours. If we are to be locked in rooms come morning, we will at least be remembered tonight." We danced, we smiled, we pretended. Augusta's keys were only ornaments, but as we stepped off the chalked floor, a page in the Dowager's livery paused too precisely near us to be accident and murmured, "Just for me, His Grace requires your presence at Blackwater's chapel upon arrival. The household must be reminded of rules." The boy's eyes were sorry. The message was not. I felt the leash slide, silk smooth around my throat. Dawn found the road to Berkshire spitting gravel against the carriage like an argument. Augusta sat opposite me, unrumpled by miles, her keys bright as a confession at her waist. My aunt dozed, her hand in mine, each jolt writing a small, unhappy flourish in her sleep. "We shall stop at the chapel upon arrival," the Dowager said, as if noting the weather. "Households decay without instruction, like hedges without clipping," I murmured. "Precisely," she returned, missing the barb by choosing not to. "Feel it." Blackwater Hall uncoiled from the park as composed as a rebuke. We rolled beneath the portico. Footmen became architecture. In the chapel, candles were already lit, their flames obedient. The household gathered, maids, grooms, the butler with his gravity, and Augusta read from her private book of rules with the same voice she might have used for scripture. "Ladies do not roam after dusk. Gentlemen do not indulge servants with conversations. No letters pass without my knowledge, to save you all from yourselves." I felt Nicholas beside me as one senses the presence of the sea, without looking. When his mother dismissed us with a gesture like a verdict, he did not meet my eye. He bowed to her, and then to me, the smallest fraction lower, and turned away before her fan could interpret it. Sally tugged my sleeve. "Look, my lady." Pinched between her fingers lay a scrap of paper thinner than a breath. She pretended to adjust my glove while I read it blind. "South corridor, third door after the stag. No one uses it at noon. K." The stag glared down in the corridor as if accusing us of treason. The third door revealed a narrow, dust-scented room with a slanted roof and a window blistered by sun. Mr. Keats stepped from behind a press with a bow that would have pleased any duchess. "My lady," he said softly, "forgive the liberty." "Liberty is in fashion," I replied, shutting us in. "What have you?" "Numbers." He set a ledger upon the press like a contraband pistol. "The late Duke kept clear books. His Grace does likewise. Her Grace keeps additional ones." Sally's brows flew up. "A duchess with side pockets." Keats's finger traced a column. "Rents diverted to the Dowager's household that exceed her jointure by some thousands a year. Funds marked trustees. Coals that never reached the coal house." And here, another page. A note in Mr. Pallister's hand. "Future Duchess's Independence Fund. Deferred pending suitable match." Independence? The word tasted like sugar and disbelief. An annuity intended by the late Duke's memorandum to be settled upon whatever lady His Grace should honor with marriage, no matter her dowry. Keats's mouth tightened. Her Grace persuaded Mr. Pallister that suitable meant rich. The memorandum, if found, would say otherwise. "If found," I repeated. "Where would a memorandum hide?" "In the single place Her Grace thinks beneath her," Sally said promptly. "The garden." Keats inclined his head. "There is the ivied folly off the south yew. His late Grace kept a chair there for reading. A loose stone by the right pilaster always looked at me like a guilty tooth." I could hear Augusta's keys in my mind as clearly as a bell. "Tonight," I said, "after the house retires. Nicholas must know." Keats's gaze flicked once to the door. "He will be at the billiards until 11, under watch. But he will walk after. He always walks when he is thinking of disobeying." He closed the ledger and slid it back into its hiding. "You did not hear this from me." "No," I said. "I heard it from a house that forgot to be afraid." The afternoon crawled on its elbows. Harbury arrived in a curricle polished like his conscience, and paid compliments as if weighing each word in a scale. "Blackwater never looked better," he told Augusta. "It looks precisely as it should," she replied. At 10:30, the house sighed into darkness. Sally brought my cloak and a pin lamp. "Footman at the west door is courting the still room maid," she whispered. "You have 8 minutes if he kisses properly." The maze breathed yew and damp, and old secrets. I found the path by touch and memory. The folly rose from the hedge like something Rome had forgotten. 2 pilasters, a pediment, ivy creeping in an orderly ambition. Nicholas was already there, his coat dark against pale stone. "You should not be," I said. "Nor you," he answered, smiling without light. "What is the plan?" "Keats's numbers," I whispered, and told him in a rush. My words like stones dropped in a pool. He listened, with his whole body, leaning the way one leans into wind. "If the memorandum lies here, your mother's claim that the trustees compel a moneyed match is smoke. Then let us cough," he said, and touched his fingers to the ivy as one might to a rosary. I followed the pilaster with my lamp, until a seam betrayed itself, narrow as a lie. The stone shifted under Nicholas's hand with the subtlety of breath. Behind it, dried petals dusted the dark. Rose, perhaps, or a life set aside. A tin box waited, plain and undecorated, the sort men use when they do not wish their secrets to be stolen by beauty. Nicholas lifted the lid. Inside lay a folded paper, wafer-sealed and brittle, addressed in a hand firm and familiar to no one living save him, to Mr. Pallister. To be read upon my death and executed without delay. Nicholas's breath left him. He put the paper into my hands as if it burned him. Will, you... I cracked the wafer. The first line swam, and then steadied. I, Thomas, Duke of Blackwater, direct that my son Nicholas shall marry where his heart inclines, and that the attached annuity from the Strand rents be settled upon his Duchess whether she bring fortune or none. The trustees are to be obedient to this charge and never to coerce by purse. I looked up, heart a drum. Nicholas closed his eyes once, as if receiving absolution. He knew, he said. He knew what she would make of me. A twig snapped. Keys whispered. A lantern's glow slid over the hedge like dawn arriving where it was not wanted. Who is there? Augusta's voice cut the leaves. Nicholas? The light swept higher, seeking. I slid the memorandum beneath the lining of my cloak and met the Duke's eyes in the dark. His mouth shaped a single word. Run. We did not run. Running made noise. Instead, we became pillars. Augusta's lantern scoured the folly, licked the pilasters, tasted the ivy, and passed on. She had come only to check that the maze behaved itself. When her light dwindled, I realized my hand was buried in the Duke's sleeve, and that I had not taken a breath in a century. Dawn, he said, his voice a thread. The chapel. Reverend Brooke will be here by first bell. He comes Thursdays to visit the schoolroom. We will ask him to witness our understanding. I will not put you in harness without your yes, but I cannot let my mother fit it to you by inches. I have never liked bridals, I whispered, nor inches. We parted as thieves do, without kisses, without lingering. Sally was waiting in my chamber with a fire kindled low and a plan already folded small. Did you find it? Yes, I said, hearing my own boldness as if it belonged to someone braver. I loosened the lining of my cloak and drew out the memorandum. Sally's eyes went very wide. Lord, that's a candle in a powder room. It is a letter, I said, though my skin prickled with the gunpowder of it. We will light it carefully. She hid the paper in the hem of my second-best gown, stitched shut with the speed of a battlefield nurse. If they search your cloak, they won't strip your frock, she muttered. Not yet. Annie rode. Sleep was a fiction. I lay with my eyes open, until the gray gathered, and then rose to the chapel bell's first notes. Soft, insistent. The air was the color of pewter. In the nave, candles made small islands of defiance. Nicholas stood near the rail, coat unbrushed, hair untidy, looking precisely like a man about to declare himself against a kingdom. Reverend Brooke bowed to my aunt, who had insisted on coming, pale but steadfast, and then to us. I am not the Archbishop, he said gently, but I am a man with ears, and a pen, and a spine. What do you ask of me? Nicholas spoke first, not because he must, but because he needed to. We intend to marry by special license at the earliest lawful hour, he said, each word placed like a stone in a bridge. We ask you to note our intention, and to stand witness to it, in case malice calls our purpose a trifle or a trap. My aunt's fingers tightened on mine. Her Grace will never consent to a special license, she whispered. Her Grace need not consent, the vicar returned with quiet steel. Only the Archbishop. He opened a small leather book. Your full names, if you please, and, if I may, your reasons, for the sake of memory should mine fail. Nicholas looked at me, and something eased between my ribs. Because Verity Somerton chooses to open a door with me, he said. Because I will not sell my name for income. Because my father... He stopped, then began again. Because my father is dead, but not voiceless. I swallowed. Because I am tired of being an object others arrange. Because I can be poor with dignity but not rich with a chain. Because I would rather face Augusta's wrath as myself than her favor as a fiction. Reverend Brooke's mouth tipped. Not quite a smile. Good reasons. He wrote, scratched, sanded, shook the page dry. I will ride to town today and put these before the Archbishop's secretary or his surrogate at Doctors' Commons. His Grace of Canterbury has a charitable view of love when it does not scandalize. I will also carry, if you wish, any note your Grace, he looked at Nicholas, prefers not to rout through the hall. Nicholas drew a breath that steadied him. I will write. We stood then, all three of us, and spoke nothing formal. No vows we could not keep. No promises that required altars. We said only what fit between us, that we would walk toward that license without flinching, that we would not run if the sky darkened, that we would be kind even when we were frightened. When Nicholas took my hand and lifted it to his lips, It was a benediction, not a claim. The kiss was brief, careful, and it burned through every carefulness I had ever worn. We left by separate doors as the day assembled itself. The Dowager's breakfast was a campaign table. Harbury applied himself to kidneys with an industry suitable for Parliament. Lady Verity, he said mildly, I had the oddest note from town. Gossip only. You will laugh. I have longed my whole life to laugh, I returned. Perhaps now is the hour. It seems, he said, almost playful, that a certain duke has been observed conducting a lady to an orangery at midnight, and that locks were involved, and that a cleric is implicated. At dawn, the city has a poet in petticoats. She calls herself Mrs. Arbuthnot, and she has said it in print. Augusta slid a thin pamphlet onto the table as a jailer might slide gruel. On dit and observations of the polite world. My name did not appear, neither did Nicholas's. But the silhouettes were drawn with such skill that anyone who could count lanterns and doors would know us. A noble house, once proud, now hedged about with yew and keys. A duke, hunted by his mother's memory. A lady with more courage than coin. The tone was coy. The implications were not. The room's temperature dropped. Nicholas read very slowly, until the last malicious curlicue curled itself into silence. When he looked up, the light had gone to iron in his eyes. Who carried this? He asked. Every coffee stall in town, Harbury said, and smiled as if enjoying the sport. By luncheon it will be at every breakfast. Room in the county. Reverend Brooke is on the road, my aunt whispered, as if saying a prayer. He has your intent in his pocket. Then we must keep him on the road, Nicholas said, voice low. He pushed back his chair. Mother, I will ride to meet the vicar and escort him to town. I wish to ensure his safety. The vicar does not require a ducal outrider, Augusta said silkily. He requires a sermon on interference. Nevertheless, Nicholas bowed and was gone, the door receiving him like a verdict. I folded the pamphlet shut with hands that did not quite obey me. Somewhere between chapel and print, our privacy had been breached like a hedge. If Reverend Brooke reached the Archbishop, we might outrun a rumor. If he did not, the rumor would become a roadblock. Sally's breath warmed my ear. My lady, she whispered, there's a boy from the post, but he won't hand me the packet. Says he was told to give it straight to her grace. Then we must intercept a letter, I said, and felt bravery find me like a draft in a closed room. Before the keys do, we reached the post room, just as the boy in red waistcoat lifted his fist to knock upon Augusta's door. Sally coughed, our agreed signal, and I slid between boy and panel with a smile I had polished at Almack's. You have ridden from town? Yes, my lady, he piped, clutching a parcel. For her grace's hand only. Her grace is engaged, said a voice like a velvet rope tightening. A gentleman stepped from the morning room, tall, elegant, his cheekbones carved to pass judgment. His hair bore the family's dark gleam. His eyes did not. Allow me, the boy bobbed. The parcel transferred. Mr. Lionel Haraway bowed the precise bow of a man, confident he need never bow twice. Cousin, they tell me I arrive in a moment of drama. How fatiguing for you. You should not have come, I said, because sincerity can sometimes cut where politeness will not. On the contrary, he replied pleasantly, I am the answer to several problems. I bring Mr. Pallister's compliments and a draft petition for chancery should ill-advised parties attempt to alter trust dispositions. I bring advice, and I bring a brace of horses that will not bolt when muskets go off in the lane. He tapped the parcel. Her grace likes a man who arrives with paper. Paper burns, Sally muttered under her breath. He heard. He smiled. Indeed, very swiftly, when fanned. Nicholas was not yet returned from riding to meet Reverend Brooke. The corridor felt longer for the lack of him. Augusta opened her door at last, and took Lionel and his parcel in with a sweep of keys and a kiss of air that smelled like power and lavender. The moment shut behind them. By afternoon, the household had a new prescription. A drive, Augusta declared, arranging us as if we were figures on a mantel. Mr. Haraway will take Lady Honora and Lady Verity in the Blackwater barouche. Viscount Harbury shall follow on horseback like a corrective illustration. The village will see that we are composed, and Mrs. Arbuthnot will be bored. My grace, my aunt ventured. Perhaps rest. Rest breeds rumor, Augusta said. Movement starves it. Sally rammed a bonnet upon my head with more vigor than reverence. If Mr. Haraway offers to help you down, you will find your own step, she hissed. If you tumble toward the hedge, not the gentleman. We set off. The barouche creaked like a conscience in damp weather. Lionel handled the reins with an ease that would have charmed me had I trusted him. Harbury rode behind, immaculate, gathering glances like tolls. I kept my hands folded so tightly that the kid creaked. At the lane by the mill, a gun cracked. 2 boys poaching, perhaps, or a farmer alarming crows. The near horse leapt. Leather sang. The barouche listed. Hold, Lionel barked. Too calm, too ready. The off-tray snapped with the neatness of a cut, not a break. The world tilted. The cry from my aunt. Gravel grinding. My name flung against the hood like a prayer. I was already braced, as if my bones had anticipated treachery. I flung my weight to the high side, caught at the rail, tasted dust. The carriage groaned back toward rightness, then slid again. Hands caught me, strong, perfumed faintly of bergamot and calculation. Viscount Harbury had flung himself from the saddle with a grace that suggested rehearsal. He lifted me bodily to the green. "Hush," he said for show. "You are safe." The village watched from doorways as if theater had come down. From London, Lionel sprang from the box. Grooms materialized out of hedges like rabbits out of hats. "Faulty trace," he said smoothly, examining leather that had, I was certain, been nicked earlier by a pocket knife. "These old harnesses. We must speak to the saddler." "My aunt," I said, struggling from Harbury's arms. Honora clung to the seat, pale and breathing in sobs. Harbury reached to lift her. I blocked him with my body and my voice. "No," I said. "We will step down." Nicholas arrived at a canter, mud flying from his horse's flanks, Keats close behind. He took in the tableau in a heartbeat. Harbury's arm extended. Lionel's hands oh so capable. Augusta's coach behind us rounding the bend. The entire village poised to write the ending. His jaw set. He dismounted and bowed to my aunt with an exquisite correctness that made my stomach drop. "Lady Honora, if you will take my arm." He would not wrench me from Harbury's grasp before witnesses and give the Dowager the pleasure of calling him intemperate. He would not play to gossip's appetite. He offered calm when I wanted fury to carry me. "I can walk," my aunt whispered, braver than I deserved. We descended together, Nicholas steady, Harbury edged out, Lionel all sympathy. "It is nothing," Lionel announced to the onlookers. A strap parted. Her Grace's household requires only a new buckle. Later, back at the hall, Augusta received us with marmoreal kindness. "Thank you, Viscount, for your prompt aid," she said, aloud, for the servants' benefit. "Mr. Haraway, you will inspect the harness room." "I will," Lionel said, taking a bow as if it were a chair. Nicholas stood in perfect decorum until the door closed upon witnesses. Then he turned on Lionel with his face carved. "You cut that strap." Lionel looked bored. "It was cut. By whom, we cannot say. A pity Mr. Brooke was not in the carriage. He might have prayed it whole." I saw the muscle twitch in Nicholas's cheek, and suddenly understood the cost of not striking a man when your entire body wishes to. He mastered himself. Public calm over private rescue, because my safety depended upon his not giving Augusta a single word to use. That night, a neat hand delivered an invitation to my chamber on her Grace's. Stationery. A small gathering tomorrow and the next. Cards under glass in the orangery. A lantern walk. A harvest supper. The house will be full. We shall remind the world that Blackwater is not to be trifled with. Beneath it, a smaller card in Lionel's hand. "I propose to speak with you at dawn in the South Library regarding the trustees. Your interests are best served by mine." I tore his card in half. I left Augusta's intact, because tomorrow the house would teem with witnesses, because keys would multiply, because the game had widened, and I could not see all the edges. At midnight, Sally crept in with news sewn to her hem. Reverend Brooke came back as far as the turnpike and sent word with a carter. He reached Doctors' Commons. The Archbishop's secretary was sympathetic. "He means to bring the special license himself at week's end. But," her voice thinned, "Mrs. Arbuthnot has printed again, says a certain lady owes her reputation to a viscount's arms in full view of a village." The paper lay like a stain upon my coverlet. I did not sleep. I watched the candle scorch the hours to tallow and thought of Lionel's calm, Harbury's arms, Nicholas's restraint, and the sound a leather strap makes when a knife finishes its work. By afternoon, the house had learned to smile. Gentlemen arrived with jokes, ladies with feathers, Augusta with a schedule precise enough to drill soldiers. Cards glittered under the orangery's panes. Lemons and topiary made civilized hills. Footmen moved like chess. "Observe," Augusta said to the world, "how one commands weather." Nicholas threaded the crowd with a courtesy cast like armor. He found me by the fountain and offered the exact bow required of a man who courts beneath a duchess's gaze. "You look tired," he said softly. "I am a little chewed," I answered, because truth feels like water when one has been starved for it. "Lionel means to speak at dawn. He means to frighten," Nicholas said. "He eats fear the way other men eat white bread." Mr. Pallister arrived in a frock coat the color of disapproval and made straight for Augusta. Lionel drifted to join them like smoke finding its companion. I could almost hear them deciding how much of the future belonged to a mother and how much to a cousin. After dinner, the company promenaded beneath the glass. Lanterns made continents of warm gold on the brick. Harbury fell into step with me and spoke lightly of weather, horses, prices, everything safe. Lady Verity, he said at last, had you accepted my third set at Almack's, your morning might have been quieter and less interesting, I replied. A lady must collect a few stories to warm her old age. Your old age will be warm if His Grace has his way, he said, smiling, as if to remind me that ways could be blocked. He lowered his voice. Do not set yourself against a mother with keys. I speak as a man who has counted sums. Somewhere near the orange trees, a glass chimed softly against a tray. My aunt swayed only a fraction, and then the fraction became a fall. I caught her before she met the tiles. Her skin felt wrong, too hot, then too cold. Honora, I said, and her name was a useless prayer. Nicholas was there at once. Sally too, with a chair and panic cleverly folded into briskness. A physician, Nicholas said to a footman. At once, not at once, Augusta corrected, straightening from the far table with a stillness that made me wish to throw oranges. At dawn, Lady Verity will hear Viscount Harbury in the small conservatory at sunrise. Private, sober, correct. Then we shall send for Dr. Tressilian. There must be no appearance of desperation. My aunt is ill now, I said, my voice shaking so hard it laced itself to iron. She is not dying, Augusta returned. She is overwrought. A night's rest will do more than leeches. Besides, the roads are poor at this hour. Dawn is soon. Nicholas's face went white without moving. Mother, your concern is noted, she said. Exercise it by discouraging Mrs. Arbuthnot from inventing another. Dawn. I lifted my aunt with Sally's help. Harbury stood very still, eyes calculating. I would prefer, he said to Augusta, mild as milk, to speak at dawn if Lady Verity consents. It is dignified. Of course, Augusta purred. Dawn is a noble hour. The conservatory door will be unlocked. Unlocked. The word fell like a crumb tossed to a starving bird. I wanted to peck Augusta's hand for it. We carried my aunt upstairs. Sally laid cool cloths. I told useless lies. Hush. Sleep. Morning will burn the bad air. She closed her eyes and clung to my fingers even in dreams. A rap at the sitting room door. Keats, hair unsettled, the need of him frayed. The vicar, he said in a whisper that dared not be a whisper. He is here. He could not keep away with the company in the house. He feared mischief. He has it, my lady. The special license. He hid in the stable until the lamps were lit and then crept by the east passage. He begs a word. Reverend Brooke stood behind the screen with hay still in his cuffs, mud on his boots, and triumph in his hands. A folded, sealed document tied with green silk. No names printed, as is proper, he said, breathless and delighted. But signed, my dear, by the Archbishop's surrogate. I have never been so glad to break a rule of quiet. I reached for the ribbon. Nicholas, summoned by Sally's swift feet, arrived in time to see me hold our future between my fingers. In the lamplight, he looked weary to the edge and beautiful beyond it. Father, he said to Brooke, plain gratitude in that one word. You are mad. Only brave, the vicar returned. Now, where to keep it till morning? We must not be caught with it in hand. Not under my hem, I murmured. Once his cunning, twice his carelessness. Keats proposed a hiding place with servants. Genius. The hollow behind the chapel's hymn board. No one dusts it, no one sings from it. I'll slide the board aside while the house is at cards. We went like conspirators by 3 different ways. The vicar to wash and look as if he'd come for pudding. Keats with the license tucked against his shirt. Nicholas to return to the lantern-lit civility of guests. I stayed with my aunt, counting breaths, counting bells, counting the ways dawn could fail. An hour passed. Another. The house quieted from roar to murmur. Keys spoke in corridors. Keats did not return. I had just begun to tell myself stories about delays when the chapel door opened without ceremony. Keats staggered in. No hat, no air, no triumph. His eyes found mine. Gone, he said, raw. I slid the board. I set the license. She was there in the gallery like a cat, or else she sent another. The hymn board is empty now. I turned my back for a prayer, and it was gone. The room tilted in a way no carriage ever had. Who? I managed. Keats swallowed. Her Grace's woman, or Mr. Haraway. No, I cannot be sure. I only know it is not where we placed it. Sally gripped the bedpost. And dawn is... The long case clock in the corridor obligingly began to strike, slow and implacable. 1, 2, 3, 4. A third knock, as polite as a guillotine. Augusta's page. My lady. Her Grace bids. Me say the conservatory door will be open at sunrise. The physician will be sent when you have finished hearing Lord Harbury. I looked at Nicholas. He looked at me. Between us, air that had been blossom last night tasted of iron. Dawn pulled the world thin and cold as paper, and a letter slid it neatly down the middle. It came on a silver salver with the Dowager's page, and a face trained not to feel. The seal was Blackwater's. The hand looked like Nicholas's, bold, a little impatient. My heart knew better. My fear overruled it. Lady Verity, last night has taught me sobriety. I cannot ask you to endure my mother's displeasure nor the deficit of my estate. You must accept a safer fortune. Forgive me. I release you from every word I ever spoke in the orangery. N. He had never called me Lady Verity in ink. He had signed N before, but without the rigid flourish now cutting the page like a reprimand. I told myself I was clever for seeing these things. Then I looked at my aunt, gray with fever against her pillows, and I was not clever at all. I was a woman with 1 coin to pay a physician and no purse to place it in. Keats burst in without the dignity that usually clothes him. The porter has orders, he breathed. Reverend Brooke is at the gate with a pocket full of God, and is refused as if he were a dancing master. The license is gone, and her grace means to keep the vicar from saying any word that might act like a license. Where is Nicholas? I asked, and hated that my voice broke his name. Sent to town on a state business, Keats said, tasting the words like vinegar. Summoned by Mr. Pallister to sign a paper that could have waited a week. He left under his mother's eye. He would not look back while she could see him. The conservatory clock chimed the quarter. Page reappeared, precise as a blade. My lady, he said, the door is unlocked. I went because the physician was reduced to a bargain, and bargains were the one language Augusta always spoke. The small conservatory was gray with the kind of light that makes glass look like water. Harbury waited with a careful expression he had likely practiced before his mirror. I will be plain, he said. I offer respect, a house without tempests, and settlements sufficient to quiet your aunt's future. 300 a year of her own, settled for life and not to cease if I die. I will not pretend at rapture. I am an honest man and a cautious one. We would suit. You wish for dignity and safety. I wish for a wife who will not spend us both to ribbons. And the physician? I asked. He inclined his head. Presently. I am not a monster. I am merely negotiating. My hands, clasped too tight, had left crescents in my gloves. You will not ask what I cannot give, I said. Not counterfeit feeling, not obedience where conscience objects. He considered, really considered, the way a man weighs law. I will not. I cannot promise to be loved. I can promise not to be ashamed of you. You will not be made to creep through gardens at midnight. That is my mother's sort of theatrics, not mine. It was an insult wrapped for Augusta, but I felt it all, the same. The conservatory smelled of earth, the good, thick scent of it, and the first warmth of the day lifted the leaves like the start of a breath. Fetch Dr. Tressilian, I said. If you do that now, I will... The word stuck like a bone. I forced it loose. I will accept. He did not crow or smile. He only bowed, a legal acknowledgement. I will send a groom this instant. He paused at the door. I mean you no harm, Lady Verity. Harm could be kind, too. He was gone. The air trembled with what I had traded. I stood among orange tubs like a thief in a church and listened for hoofbeats. None came. Instead, down in the courtyard, a voice I knew, dear as bread, argued with a porter's refusal and was turned away on a tide of yes, my orders, and no, sir. Reverend Brooke's hat tilted with indignation. His hand rose once in benediction that was also a curse. The gate shut. I pressed my forehead to the cold of a pain and swallowed my good sense with my pride. We were boxed by Augusta's geometry. The special license had been pilfered. Nicholas had been ridden out of reach. The vicar had been barred at the threshold of our salvation. I had nothing to buy the doctor with but myself. Dr. Tressilian arrived within the hour. Harbury had influence enough to bend time when he wished, and his presence and his caustic bottle were like rain on tinfoil. Some noise, some shine, little comfort. He bled my aunt of hope and called it a physic. Rest, he said. Quiet, and no agitation. No agitation. Augusta paused in the doorway long enough to let the phrase settle like dust. Lady Verity, she said, satin over steel. You will be grateful to Lord Harbury. I am, I answered. Perhaps it was true. Gratitude is not love, but it has bones of its own. I stood very straight because my spine would not. Forgive me if I bent now. When afternoon reached its ripe, heavy hour, Harbury requested a word in the south drawing room, and I gave it to him. Do you accept me? He asked, and I thought of all the doors that had closed since lanterns first swung in the maze. I accept, I said, because my aunt's breath was the hinge of every door I had left. His smile was thin and sincere. He reached, not for my hand, but for a bell to call for Augusta. Then, at the harvest fete tonight, he said, her grace shall announce our understanding. I nodded like an automaton, and left before I remembered how to cry. On the landing I looked out toward the drive where Nicholas had vanished, and told myself very calmly that love had always been a luxury for women with keys. The harvest fete unfurled like a pageant to convince the sun it was still midsummer. Lanterns in shades of apricot and wine blushed along. The yew, fiddles leapt. The orangery exhaled warmth, as if it had decided to be generous. I wore a gown the color of cream that had seen better days and better fortunes. Harbury stood at my side at a correct distance. Augusta glided like a ship that had never met a storm. Somewhere in the crowd, Lionel smiled with his eyes and not his mouth. The announcement waited in Augusta's fan. I could feel it ticking. I tried not to look toward the gate, because looking had never brought anyone back. My aunt, propped by pillows on a settee near the conservatory doors, managed a wan smile for me that undid me more than tears. A lantern bobbed too low. A gentleman laughed too loudly and swept his sleeve through light. Silk kissed flame. It is the nature of you to remember what the sun owes it. Resin takes insult as invitation. Fire ran up the hedge like a rumor catching words. For a beat, the crowd admired it as if Augusta had arranged even this. Then the surprised little noise people make before panic became a body with many legs. "Water!" someone cried. Buckets arrived as if conjured. Footmen formed a line. The maze glowed, then roared. Smoke wrote a dark grammar above us. "Sally," I shouted, for I had seen her dart into the first turn to retrieve a terrified housemaid. Harbury caught at my sleeve and missed. "No," he cried. "You will be trapped." "I already am," I said, and went where the smoke beckoned. The yew pressed close and hot. Sap popped like musket fire. I tied my fichu over my mouth and felt along the clipped wall with my palms. Somewhere ahead, a girl coughed like a broken bell. Somewhere nearer, flames made a constant, hungry industry. "Verity!" The name came from behind me, full-throated and impossible. I could have found that voice blind in a hurricane. Nicholas, who should have been in town, who was not, who was here. Here, I tried to answer, but smoke made my lungs into strangers. I stumbled. Heat lifted my hem with wicked fingers. Hands found me, burning cool through glove and sleeve, and then I was over a shoulder, an undignified sack of Duchess-in-waiting, being carried around turns I could not have chosen. He set me down at a crossroads where the air still kept a memory of breath. Green eyes I knew were fierce and wet with smoke. Soot made him a highwayman. Rage made him beautiful. "You do not go into fires," he said hoarsely. "I need you to learn this rule very quickly." "You left," I coughed. "You were sent." "I turned at the turnpike and borrowed the vicar," he returned roughly. "He rides like a poor curate and swears like a sailor. He also brings proofs." He lifted me. No argument, just arms, and ran. We burst from the maze into a confusion of buckets and cries, and the sugar stink of scorched yew. Reverend Brooke stumbled after us with a face like judgment, and a bundle under his coat that looked to my blurred vision like a miracle tied in twine. Keats appeared with ledgers under his arm, and soot on his collar. Sally emerged with the housemaid clinging and coughed. "Present, like a soldier at muster." "Clear the lawn," Nicholas commanded. His grace now, not a son. And the crowd, designed for obedience, obeyed. "Mother," he said, and the word had no silk in it. "We will have the truth upon the grass where everyone can see it." Augusta stood with her fan still, a general surprised by weather. "This is not the hour. This is exactly the hour," he said, and turned to the people whose glances make or unmake a household. "You have been entertained. Now you shall be informed." He nodded to Keats. Keats laid out the ledgers upon a garden table, the neat columns, the diverted rents, the coal that never reached a cellar. "The late Duke's memorandum," he said, and I, shaking, unpicked the stitching Sally had set into the hem of my second-best gown, and drew out the brittle paper that had seemed a candle beside powder. Reverend Brooke took it up, and read aloud in a voice meant for chapels and emergencies. "The order that the Duchess of Blackwater, whoever she might someday be, should have an independence from strand rents, fortune or none, that trustees were to obey, that coercion was forbidden." A murmur, a tide, ran through the company. Augusta's fan tapped once against her palm. "Convenient," she said, and produced at a dramatic moment by a dramatic curate. "I see Mrs. Arbuthnot's hand in this." "Mrs. Arbuthnot," said Nicholas, sudden and savage, "writes better than Mr. Pallister copies." He lifted a sheet of thick paper and held it beside another. "This morning a letter arrived on my hand that was not my hand. Where would such a thing be drafted? At a solicitor's table, on a blotter." He held the blotter to the lantern's surviving light, and there, dim, reversed, the ghost of words swam. "I release you. Forgive. I asked Mr. Pallister for this when I met him on the turnpike, coming to drag me back to town. He did not know that blotting paper keeps secrets. He knows it now." All eyes went to Mr. Pallister. He had the color of milk refusing to be cream. Her Grace instructed only what any prudent mother would do if she wished to steal a priest's errand and a son's consent. Reverend Brooke finished, his voice like oak. "The special license was issued in Doctors' Commons, signed by the Archbishop's surrogate. It was stolen from the chapel hymn board by a hand with keys. It can be reissued, and will be, but the spirit of it stands here, signed in smoke." Harbury looked from evidence to Augusta to me. In his eyes I saw the arithmetic of retreat. He bowed, elegant even in defeat. "Your Grace, he said to Nicholas. You have made your case as publicly as your mother arranged your party. I withdraw my suit. Lady Verity, he met my gaze cleanly. I regret only that we did not begin as friends and leave it there. Thank you, I said, meaning it, for honesty is a sort of balm when one has been blistered by intrigue. Lionel smiled with nothing behind it. Chancery enjoys puzzles, he murmured. Chancery enjoys paper, Nicholas returned, holding up the memorandum. And witnesses, and a vicar prepared to swear the story of a stolen license until his tongue falls out. He turned then, not to the crowd, not to Augusta, but to me. Smoke still laced the air. The yew glowed, sullenly along one long burn. The guests held their breath as if breath itself had become valuable. Nicholas went to one knee upon Augusta's exact perfect lawn and took my ash-streaked hand in his ash-streaked one. Lady Verity Somerton, he said, voice steady as a bell, before those who would barter us and those who would bless us. Will you marry me? Yes, I said, and it felt like opening a door no one could lock again. Augusta's fan did not move, only her eyes did. Then produce a license, she said softly, or all you have opened is the theater. Reverend Brooke smiled a dangerous, holy smile and laid a sealed packet, countersigned and waxed anew, upon the table. As it happens, he said, I brought two. The second seal, green silk, clean wax. Reverend Brooke's smile broke like weather changing. The guests breathed again. The bucket line lost its urgency as the yew smoldered into sulk. Augusta's fan tapped once, twice, and stilled. She had weapons other than paper. She had the force of a gaze, yet even steel tires after striking stone. We will not marry in smoke, Nicholas said, voice steadier than my knees. We will marry when the air is fit to breathe, with witnesses who can tell truth from theater. Tomorrow, Reverend Brooke said, already composing the service in his head. The chapel, after the bell. He looked at Augusta and added with ecclesiastical innocence, unless the chapel is locked. Augusta's mouth curved as if she admired the insolence of a curate. I have never locked a church, she said quietly. I only lock people. The night dissolved by increments. Buckets stacked. Guests soothed. Ledgers returned to Keats's safe hands. Harbury bowed out with clean dignity, promising to send Dr. Tressilian back at dawn. Lionel lingered long enough to share a look with Mr. Pallister that promised future mischief until he saw Nicholas's eye and thought better of it. He disappeared into the darkness as if he had been born of it. Mrs. Arbuthnot would have copy for weeks. She would write of keys and yew and smoke-signed vows. Let her. It could no longer hurt us. When at last I found my bed, I slept like one who has stood all night in the wind and then come inside. In the morning, the corridor smelled of beeswax, not battle. The sun lay honest on the floor. We married in the chapel with only those who had earned the right to stand near us. My aunt, color restored, dignity intact, held my hand for a final, aching minute, then placed it in Nicholas's as if she were restoring a mislaid jewel. Sally cried soundlessly into her apron. Keats did not, being a man, but he polished his cuff with unnecessary vigor. The two footmen at the back sang so softly, in the responses that I loved them forever. Dearly beloved, Reverend Brooke began, and for once the words did not feel like furniture, they felt like breath. Nicholas looked at me as if my name were carved upon the world, and his task was only to read it aloud. When I said, I will, Augusta's eyelids fluttered, a small, involuntary acknowledgement that some doors closed themselves. At the signing, Brooke steadied the parchment and because he could not resist a sermon even when not preaching, said, This is what papers are for. He blew the ink dry with reverence. Nicholas pressed the seal as if setting his signet into a new era. I wrote my name, Verity Haraway, and felt as if I had finally stepped through the door he had promised would be mine to open. We emerged into a morning as ordinary as bread. That was the miracle. The village bell tolled 11. The kitchen sent up the smell of roasting beef in honor of matrimony. A stable boy doffed his cap with glee. Augusta awaited us at the chapel door with the composure of a queen who has decided against civil war because the road would be muddy. Your Grace, she said to Nicholas, and the title was the only weapon she permitted herself. You have chosen spectacle over strategy. I have chosen a wife, he answered. Spectacle was your contribution. Her eyes cooled by a degree. Then, very precisely, from the chain at her waist, she unhooked a ring of small, neat keys and a larger key plain as bread. She held them for a long theatrical moment, and every breath in the courtyard waited. These opened the post room, the silver closet, the morning room secretary, the garden doors, and the back stairs, she said. They will now hang from the Duchess's girdle. I expect the usual economies. Coal accounted honestly. Wine not. Wasted on men who do not know what they drink. Letters posted when they should be, and not when they should not. If you choose to keep extravagances, keep them out of sight. I looked at Nicholas. He did not nod. He did not plead. He let the moment belong to Augusta, because that generosity was the first dignity she had encountered in months. I curtsied. Not submission, but acknowledgement. "Thank you," I said softly. "I will not lock what need not be locked." Her fingers brushed mine when the keys changed hands. They were cool. She was not stone. "I have made you my enemy," she said, too low for anyone else. "It is tiresome. Do not make me regret inventing you. I would rather make you proud," I returned, surprised at myself. "Pride is not fashionable," she said, and almost smiled, "but it wears better than scandal." In the days that followed, rooms breathed easier. Mr. Pallister, faced with ledgers, a curate with a long memory, and a blotting book that had betrayed him, declared himself unwell and retired from Blackwater's service. The trustees, confronted with the late Duke's memorandum and a new Duchess with more will than coin, learned the comforts of obedience. Lionel sent a note from town in an elegant hand, no hard feelings, which I consigned to the fire with the pleasure of a woman who has keys to her own grate. Harbury called with a gift for my aunt, a little traveling clock with an alarm she could set for her medicines. He refused tea, accepted gratitude, and left before kindness could grow claws. Mrs. Arbuthnot printed a column titled, "Of Fires That Purify and Doors That Open," and for once made something pretty with her malice. We replanted the yew where the fire had bitten it. Nicholas dug the hole with his coat off, shirt damp at his throat, hair untidy as the night we had first broken rules. I held the sapling straight while he tamped the earth, and when we were done, the garden smelled of green cuttings and a future that would require pruning, but not locks. "Do you feel it?" he asked, wiping his brow with the back of his hand and looking at me, as if I held both the spade and the sun. "The weight?" I asked, touching the keys at my waist. "The opposite," he said, and kissed my temple like an oath. "The absence." The maze stood black-scarred along one wall, a reminder and a map. We walked its turns in the gentler light, and laughed once when a robin scolded us for presuming. When evening fell, the house did not shut itself like a trap. It breathed. I opened the garden door and left it that way for a minute too long on purpose, just to watch the night come in without orders. Later, by lamplight in the library where Augusta's rules had once propped themselves like spare candlesticks, I wrote a letter, the first from the post room under my own key. "Dearest Aunt," I began, though she was only upstairs, because joy insists on ceremony. "We are safe. We are honest. We are unlocked." Nicholas came to stand behind me and set his palm at my waist where the keys chimed softly. "What does the Duchess write?" he asked. "That doors may be opened," I said, and turned to him, and the house agreed.